What'd you think of the brackets, Jay, writ large?
I mean, overall, I didn't have a lot of quarrels with it. Every year we lose our minds over who gets in and who doesn't at the very end of the line. And maybe 10 years ago, I would have been one of those losing my mind. But every year it's the same thing. There's one or two you're going, what? And there's a part of me, Rich, that is thinking, why do we constantly argue over who's the 45th best team in the country? I mean, you never hear football arguing over who's the 20th. It just doesn't make any sense. Like we waste time talking about that instead of talking about the best teams. But North Carolina's inclusion was curious because we've always been told the standard is who did you play and who did you beat? And Carolina played a great schedule. They just didn't win against it. And, that's not to say that because they didn't win a certain amount of games, they shouldn't be in. It's comparing them against the other teams at the end of the line. And all the bracketologists across this wide landscape, and there are hundreds of them, were saying that, okay, Texas and North Carolina aren't going to make it. And I thought Texas should have been in first among the bubble teams because of the number of quality wins they had. They made it. But Carolina was a surprise. But other than that, there's not a ton to quarrel with. Maybe a seed line here or two. That's about it.
Well, in terms of people losing their minds, if you want, we're 23 minutes into the press conference of the governor of West Virginia, along with the attorney general. Jay, we can keep you up to speed on, I don't know if you heard this on your travel day, but they're threatening to sue the NCAA, or as he referred to it, the National Corruption Athletic Association. Jay, can keep you up to speed on
Well, I mean, they can certainly do that. I think the depositions would be fabulous television. I would love to participate.
Who would you depose first, Jay? You know what I mean? Like, who would be your first person to sit down for this sort of thing?
I'd go to the top leadership, but they don't know anything about the selection process. They're totally separate from it. But when you know this, Rich, like all the selection committee members, and I think by and large they do a really good job. But they're, commissioners and athletic directors. The truth is they're not able to watch games like we do. They've got other jobs. And so it becomes very formulaic. It's really, they have so many bracketing principles. That's why all these bracket people get 67 out of 68 every year. They give themselves the automatic qualifiers, but the rest of it's pretty easy. And we argue over a couple of teams at the end of the line. And nobody's out there trying to screw anybody. That I know. And I always think of this, I don't know who did the interview. It might have been you with David Stern when they were asking him about the lottery process. Remember the old story about when Patrick Ewing was coming out in '85 that they did the lottery with envelopes back then. And somebody said, well, the New York Knicks envelope had been in a freezer and it was colder, and that's how they did it. And I remember Stern very calmly saying, no, that didn't happen. That's rather silly. And he goes, and you realize if we did something like that, it would be a federal crime. And that's the same kind of thing here. If they were trying to manipulate this in some conspiratorial fashion, you could argue it'd be a federal crime. And I just don't think that kind of thing really happens.
Well, speaking as a Knicks fan, Jay, the real federal crime is that Ewing couldn't escape Michael Jordan his entire life, to be honest with you. But that's for another day and another conversation. But in terms of putting the bracket together, it does feel like the Big Ten tournament result didn't matter, that the bracket was already handled. It was one of the last tournament games that was played on Sunday. Michigan won, and I understand that Michigan had 3 straight losses to finish its regular season, and it does appear that that's what the selection committee worked off of, was the final regular season, and that the tournament didn't matter, and that the 3 teams that Michigan beat in the tournament wound up having higher seeds, and the Wolverines get a 5 seed. Is that a fair assumption that they just that was it, and they weren't going to change any of the seedings regardless of the results of the Big Ten tournament?
Well, I can't speak to what would happen with their win on Saturday, but it does make sense that everything's locked in on Sunday at 3:00. They're playing while the bracket's being finished, and unless there was a bid stealer, like an NC State situation last year, where if they win, they're in. If they lose, they're out type of deal for the automatic qualifier. I can see that, but they got to have that stuff set by about then. So they can't just sit around for another hour and a half after that and delay the process that much. So I get that. And there are going to be, there are going to be some things up or down a seed line based upon these bracketing principles that they have, like BYU can't play on a Sunday. There's all kinds of stuff about conferences, and you don't want to play anybody in your conference before a certain time in the tournament. And the SEC screwed that up this year with 14 bids, so they're going to have to play each other way earlier than they would have otherwise. Or if you played a team 3 times or whatever, they do all that stuff instead of just let's list them 1 to 68, put them in the bracket, and then play from there. That's the way I'd prefer to do it, but I understand why they do. They get a lot of complaints from their membership.
Well, I mean, what happens to these complaints? It's just like, sorry, this is just you got to break some eggs to make an omelet. Let's go. There's 64 teams come Thursday, and let's roll. Right? I mean,
it's kind of like that. It's kind of like, what would you do if you were us? Like, give us a better way when we have a selection show starting at 6 o'clock. What are we supposed to do? I do think that's a fair point. And you've seen some conferences switch their in the past, decade or so, maybe longer. You've seen them switch their championship game from Sunday to Saturday, so that maybe better TV windows or all that stuff. I don't know but the Big Ten does it for television too. So there's a lot of things at play here, and it's not the easiest process. I get it. That's why I try to cut them a little bit of slack. But selection's a big deal. So you leave one team out, put another team in. Those are important decisions. Seeding we can argue about, but the old AD at Duke, Tom Butters, when I was in school there, was chairman of the selection committee, and he used to say you can play your way out of a bad seed, but you can't play your way into the tournament after the selections have been made. So he felt selection was more important than seeding.
Catch the Rich Eisen Show live weekdays from 12 to 3 p.m. Eastern on Roku Sports Channel in the U.S.